As you know, these sessions are a friendly exchange of ideas and strategies. The context is for the most part, a student audience. So what we're interested in doing is trying to understand not only an extraordinarily beautiful piece of construction, which it obviously is, but what it means in a conceptual way, what its aspirations are, what its strategies are about, and whether it lives up to those or not. I'd like to welcome Professor Abe, Hitoshi, to SCI-Arc. All of you, I think, know him and know his work. An international architect with offices in Tokyo and in Los Angeles, is in the midst at the moment of building an unusually interesting and difficult project for the business school in Vienna. Will have some role in the Biennale coming up and so on and so on. So on this occasion, those are peripherally the subject, let's say. And what we want to do is to try to understand what Hitoshi has done here in terms of replicating or giving us a facsimile of the weather and the possible associations between the form of weather and architecture. And I think it would be useful if you could start out by telling us a little bit the story of Noguchi and so on, just the background so people understand the context in which this is being done.
Thank you. I actually have to say that I really appreciate that I could do this project here. And I'm really happy about this. This is a 1/7 mock-up of the roof we are proposing to plaza at JCCC. And the plaza was designed by a sculptor, Japanese American sculptor, Isamu Noguchi. But the concept behind it is exactly when you showed up an hour ago. You said, you know this Jimi Hendrix thing?
Couldn't do that.
Oh, so I should know. You said that. Excuse me while I kiss this guy. The idea was actually how we can make the land kiss the sky. And so he said, oh, you said it, and then there's nothing we can talk today. And that was the concept. And when we look at the Noguchi Plaza, its design and we're respected by the community. And but also
You might say where it is. Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's really near here. If you know the JACC Plaza, it's on the second housing and the central, San Pedro, I'm sorry. And it's a design by Isamu Noguchi back in the 70s. It's covered with the red bricks and so on. There's a famous sculpture by Noguchi, but the entire plaza was designed. But the issue is, it's so hot during summer. You can't stand there. Even though the whole place is really nicely designed and somehow has a kind of spiritual sensation. So we are thinking how to accommodate this area so that we propose a roof so that it provides shading and also protection for the rain, so that many people can use this plaza more. But how can we do it without insulting Noguchi's design? So we started also so that this roof will float over the plaza without touching any structure and examples of Noguchi's design. So it will be supported from outside, so it has a few columns, and also this half-acre size of the roof will float. And also, if you look at the plaza, he really spent a lot of time to design Earth, but he actually created also some kind of a, how do you say that, boundary to separate, yeah, so that everything is almost above the ground like a Japanese garden. But it never created the sort of a connection to the sky. So we thought by inserting roof, we don't separate the ground from the sky, but we can make something which we can make like land kiss to the sky. So the idea was again, like you said, Noguchi kiss to the sky.
So the comment for those of you who missed it, when Hitoshi and I bumped into each other a little while ago, and I just mentioned the Hendrix comment or phrase, "Excuse me while I kiss the sky," and there probably could be an interesting exegesis or explanation of what it means to excuse me while I kiss the sky. In other words, what sort of emotional sensibility is suggested by the relationship of the person on the land to the sky. And the question is, maybe the first question is to Noguchi, and maybe you can speak for him. What would, given the context of a Japanese garden, which is handmade, which is rough, which is asymmetrical and very particular, and actually goes through quite a range of textural and spatial options, what would Noguchi have to say about this addition to that context?
Actually, since we started to work on this project, we studied a lot of Noguchi. And he's a very interesting guy. He was always on the boundary of west and east. And also that he's always wandering around looking for the place to settle down. So when he was in Japan, he was recognized as American. When he was in America, he was recognized as a Japanese. And also his personal life, and also is really, really complex. Because as if like he's looking for the place to settle down, but he immediately, when he finds a place to settle, denies it. And if you look at also his work, it's obvious that he's heavily influenced by the Japanese sort of historical gardening and the architectural environment and so on. But also at the moment that he's trying to do this Japanese thing, he want to run away from it. So that if you look at his work, it's not really the Japanese, but it's not really also the Western. So the Noguchi Plaza there at JCC, Plaza idea is a Western. But then he inserted the Japanese sensibility. So if you do the plaza there, usually plaza is open to the street. But he built this wall, white wall, to block the plaza from outside, to create almost like a sanctuary. If you go to Zen Garden, you see all the rocks with the sand, and there's always this fence, like a beautiful fence, saying this is an internal world, and then anything beyond the fence is external world, so that makes this space very spiritual, and that's what he's trying to do with Western vocabulary.
But I think the point is it's a very particular kind of world.
Yes.
I mean, there are gardens, and if you study capability around Chinese garden, Japanese garden, and what we're looking at here is an addition. So this is always a question of some interest. How do you add to something, particularly something which was understood in a sense to be finished?
Yes.
And aside from a conceptual argument, which is that nothing is ever finished, but I think as he understood it, it was done.
Right.
And now we're adding something which conceivably could be understood. This is really the question. Does it extend it by amending it, or is it an adversary? Right. Does it contradict it, which which is certainly plausible. In other words, are we adding something that adds up to the same context that the Japanese garden typically represents? Or are we introducing something which is in fact, notwithstanding the nomenclature and the weather and the clouds and all of the verbal associations, that belongs to a different way, a very different way of thinking about space?
I think what we're trying to do here is more like judo. You know judo? It's a Japanese.
I know what it is, but I'm not a master of it.
It's not like a boxing. Boxing, you hit each other, right? And try to destroy. But in judo, to
M&M, I know.
Yeah. And to do that, you have to use the other guy's power and the movement. So it's more like a dancing to defeat the other guy, to accomplish something. So here, what we are trying to do is we really learn from Noguchi, but we want to use the Noguchi's power to accomplish something new. So the Len-tic-u-lar-is, I can't pronounce actually this name, just is a particular cloud, which clouds hovering over the mountain mostly, but the shape of it is not independent from the actual landscape of it. This particular cloud shape is actually the result of how air sort of influenced by the landscape. So that it's a projection of the landscape to the air condition. So this one is also heavily influenced by by the way, this sample does exist in the Nishi Plaza. And we were trying to think that maybe...
This is only one of us is going to read this.
Yeah. I'm sure you're going to read badly. You are known for that, but again, what I'm trying to say is, maybe... So what I'm trying to say is, I'm not denying what he does, but I'm not really also following what he does. I'm using his energy to produce something new. And that's why the lab has to kiss the sky.
Well, I think from a student point of view, what might be interesting is the consistent focus on associations with literature, with science, with archaeology, with anthropology. And what we so often get into are discussions that have to do with the naming of projects and the association of projects with ideas, which may or may not, for all the appeal of the ideas, may or may not actually be a facsimile with what we've actually done. And I just looked this up online 10 minutes ago, and the name of the cloud form, which is quite fascinating, it has a whole pedigree. So really to talk about this, you have to know a little bit of the science of clouds just to see what the aspiration is. And then we could discuss whether that image and that aspiration are in fact realized in a structure that is not identical, but is analogous to the shape. So the cloud form, which seems to develop at very high altitudes, in case your next studio has to do with weather, it develop at very high altitudes having to do with moisture rising, and makes a form which is a little Chernobyl-ish or 3 Mile Island-ish, which is very close to being, and I think you referred to it in your text, very close to approaching bilateral symmetry. But the difference is that it's a kind of microwave symmetry. I mean, it's soft and it's delicate and it's ethereal and it's ephemeral and it moves and it goes away very quickly. The other thing, for students of weather, is that apparently once it's formed, there's an enormous force in the funnel, and people who fly gliders try to get into these funnels and go sailing away as a function of the force of these clouds. So there are a whole series of suggestions about symmetry and asymmetry, hard lines and fragile lines, movement, forces, and all of that, which is which combines a number of very poetic associations. But the feeling of that cloud has, I think, more to do with the rough qualities and the asymmetry of Noguchi. And again, whether I think I'm repeating the question in a slightly different form. Given the weather pedigree of a form like this and quite a literal replication of it, would it be better if we just dropped the name and dropped the discussion and didn't make an attempt to associate the form of the roof structure with an antecedent on the weather report, let's say. And then we could talk about this. In other words, are we helping ourselves or are we making it more difficult?
I don't know, actually. I was fascinated by this cloud, just simply that it represents interesting sort of connection between the terrain and the sky, and it's also this cloud cannot exist by itself, and the form seemingly very still. The form stays as it is, but actually the actual water which creates the shape is constantly changing. So it's a dynamic phenomenon, looks still. And all those connotation implications are really fascinating me. And when we have to confront this project, the plaza designed by famous artists, and then we have to sort of propose a structure to cover it, I thought this seemed very natural to sort of use that. I should be very honest. The name of the first came later on. So, but I thought, oh, okay, that really represents all the struggle we went through to propose this. So we just said, okay, for this particular exhibition, why don't we use that word so that we can really sort of represent all the struggle we went through to propose this. We wanted to make the roof as ephemeral as possible, like this.
But if you, I mean, you're familiar with this discussion, and we run through it in the discourse of projects, and whether the labeling of a project suggests to students that if you can only find an esoteric association with something in literature, in history, in art, in science that has a pedigree, you can find that association and then say, in a sense, I'm doing that, or I'm like that, or my work is following that, and you really can't contest it because it has such and such pedigree. I mean, just interested in the discussion. And I think we've talked here a number of times that the whole history of modern architecture over the last 100 years is loaded with those kinds of attempts to associate them. If you go all the way back to who? To Grieg, Braque, Picasso, beginning of the 20th century. And then you go ahead about 25 years and there's Le Corbusier in Algiers. And if you look at the form language of Le Corbusier in Algiers, and you look at the form language of Grieg and Braque, you see very clear associations with an art movement. And there's the Bauhaus and assembly lines, and there's the Metabolists, which we might talk about, the Metabolists and associations with science and the human body. They're the so-called Deconstructivists and associations with a sophisticated literary movement that arguably has nothing to do with definitions of architecture. So I think maybe less, or perhaps less, in terms of a discussion between Hitoshi and me, and a more general kind of discourse, which is symptomatic of particularly discussions in schools of architecture, that the relationship between naming and labeling and associating architecture with sophisticated subject matter outside of architecture as a way of assigning value ipso facto, I think seems to me at least worth talking about. There's another very interesting, I think, aspect to Hitoshi's project, and I think it's different than anything that we've had here before. It's, in fact, a study model. It's a study model of the project north and east that he described. So this has a meaning in a particular scale because it associates with a full-scale proposition that will be built soon. So the question is, what is the meaning in the gallery in terms of gallery exhibits, antecedents, and discussions of a subject which belongs to the gallery, or it doesn't, or it really belongs to something else, as if we said, okay, Hitoshi, we're going to do a series of models showing projects. So to what extent is this a discussion of what this object is in this space and its relationship to its predecessors in this space, or is it simply a discussion of what's coming in a large-scale mock-up? And would it be evaluated differently if we, first we're suggesting we take away the name, potentially. Now we take away the association with anything outside the room. Right. And we simply say, okay, this is this object in this room. And what does it mean? And is that fair to do that?
Yeah, it's fair. I actually, in any occasion to the exhibition, I just said this is a mock-up of the proposed project, but I really hate to see, something which represents something which doesn't exist yet, like the representation, something which is not there. Because then knowledge itself tells the absence of architecture. But to me, this is what this is. I really want to see this as it is here, and I really would like to see the exhibition. I'm not a big fan of seeing exhibition of particular sort of a design representing which is not exist there. That means you are listening what architecture is thinking. Architect is thinking. But I think the object should be the object, and people should decide how they feel and how they think by looking at these things. There shouldn't be no particular connection to judge this object and so on. I really strongly believe that this should be it.
But of course, if that's true, I mean, the object as you've designed it is in an open space against the sky with no perimeter walls and so on and so on. So then, if we wanted to talk about this object in this space, then we'd have to talk about, for instance, why is it here and not 2 centimeters this way or this way? And does that make any difference?
It does make a difference. And also that we are very careful about defining size of the roof, height of the things, and this particular things. It's all corresponding to what we have here. If you look at all the way, everything, the way we hang this sky, everything is related to what we have, all the air duct, the beam, and so on. And so this is particularly designed for this space. And also,
might have worked better if we just punched out the roof.
No. But at least we have a ring here, right?
Yeah.
So this is so that we can rest.
Right. Let me ask you something related to what I just said about movements over time in modern architecture. There's a well-known and powerful and important discussion, I guess, in the 60s, 70s, Tange, Kikutake, Kurosawa, Metabolism.
Right.
And that association had something to do with an argument about the science of the human body.
Yes.
And an analog in architecture. So spine is not a generic architectural term. It has an association in medical science or something. And the question would be, in your mind, although it's not an association with human physiology, it is an association with natural conditions, with natural conditions, weather conditions. Could we categorize this as anticipated by metabolism as a piece of metabolist architecture?
Actually, we are working on the book about Tokyo, and together with Incontinent.
Yeah.
And we are coming up with the idea called void metabolism. Actually, if you look at the metabolism proposed back in the 60s, it was about using infrastructure as a permanent framework, so only the rooms, means occupied space, will metabolize. But the core of the infrastructure space. So it was about actually designing infrastructure space. So it's not that ephemeral as actually everybody thinks. It's really rigid. And for this void metabolism, we are talking about, it's not actually the infrastructure dominates the metabolism in Tokyo. It's more like a void space, just interstitial space. We small buildings which sustain the quality of the Tokyo. So even though the small buildings metabolizes, but this interstitial space stays and maintains the quality of the urban space there. So we are more interested in this kind of interstitial space, the relationship with things other than the object itself. And that's actually the difference from the metabolism back in the 60s. And the new metabolism we started to sort of talk in 2000.
So you're saying there's an association in the sense that the implication of the building, or the building implicates what's, that tower, that cylindrical piece that Tange did,
Yes.
It's a completely odd site. Cylindrical piece,
Sure.
and a series of cantilevers.
We built it in
Yeah.
That's a tower for the Yomiuri newspaper.
Yeah. And then the other one, which is the one there's on Fuji, the newspaper, radio station.
Yeah, the huge
series
one.
of maps, which seemed to suggest something that could, and I think it was a teacher of mine years ago.
Oh, really?
Wow.
I never met him.
And was talking about that building as if the building could cover the earth. I mean, a system of mass. I think in this case, you went one better by bringing the entire sky into the discussion. So if that's the argument is to bring in something which is beyond the limits. In other words, the project doesn't explain itself simply in its own terms, but tries to find a meaning with associations outside itself.
They back then they believed in sort of a future, and they thought that they could control everything. So that the biggest maybe the problem with the metabolism back then was they really thought that they can control everything, which we know now.
Were they wrong?
What do you think?
I get to ask you. Let's talk a little bit about the linguistics or the technology of the project. That what you've done is to use a series of rings and cables, so that probably the overwhelming sense of the project is as a kind of apparatus. And I think a piece of apparatus with bolts and screws and rods and cables and all of that. And I think what I was suggesting initially is it's conceivable that doesn't dovetail with the idea of the sky. It has more to do with an interest in assembly. I think it's one we know, and I think it's one we recognize. And I was wondering, when you made this the drawing, right? You see this drawing, but and what's of some interest in the drawing is that the surface of the object is entirely uniform. No cables. But when you look at this piece, which we get to in a minute, but if you look at the back of the piece, and if you're standing over there where Greg is, you can look into the back of it and you can see how it was made and all of that. So the let's say, conventional or recognizable argument, you make it, and then you get to see how you made it, and that's part of the argument. But it seems to be different than the drawing, which is the shape is conceptually the same, but the surface is a neutral surface, as opposed to, would we have done that with a few more days? Or is this a different idea than this?
No, this is just a drawing, right?
That's what we do.
Yeah, but the idea is that this is a part, right? This is a project. And then if you look at this thing, it's sucking all the visual image in this room, on this surface. You see the entrance there and the entrance there at once, and it just, so that I really wanted to create this focal point, which all the energy gets sucked into the sky. And that's why this surface had to be polished. But inside is outside, and I wanted to keep it rough. And
but that gives it a kind of centroid or center, which means in an organizational sense. The garden isn't quite like that. The garden is a little bit more happenstance or piecemeal or fragmented or whatever word you like. Whereas this thing is a kind of samurai back, you know?
actually, you know, samurai maneuver, there's a lot of complex maneuver.
So, one word.
But
Mixed martial arts.
actually, I think we intentionally tried to create this so that there's a really big gesture, so that actually the whole activity in the plaza can really suck into the sky in the middle of the plaza, which is indicated by this circle. If you go there,
But then, what's interesting about this, and I think I was trying to get to this before, didn't quite make it, it's a critique of the other piece. Of the other piece, Noguchi's piece, which tends to dissipate a little, as sort of wander out here, wander out there, and over here, and whereas this says, no, let's pull it all together and, excuse me while I kiss the sky.
Everybody gonna go up to kiss the sky, but also the Noguchi can stay as he is.
But would you accept the argument that this is a critique or a remodeling of the good?
It's a judo.
In English.
It's a judo or dancing.
Yeah.
Meaning, you know, I really hate to deny something and then do my thing. There's, you know, and Noguchi has kind of idea of Zen garden. So there's a multiple focal point.
Right.
And that's great. And then also we adding new feature to it. So that there's a kind of interesting sort of balance between what the quality of Zen garden has and what this strong gesture has. And that adds more complexity into it.
So maybe in a way we're saying the same thing, that it offers a different way of interpreting something which is stations or a number of points which could be in a philosophical way or in a conceptual way reconciled somehow and funneled back up. So from all of these differences, this sounds like a kind of philosophical proposition. It's like tedious, but you could reconcile all of the pieces and they could be understood in one way, which isn't necessarily lived in the experience of his project.
Please, you just killed the sky. Oh my God, we have the sky.
We remember. There's another interesting, you have to sit in here to see the consequences of the reflective surface. But one of the things that struck me, and I remember this from a project we did where we bent a lot of glass without quite knowing what the consequences would be. And in bending the glass and looking through the glass and realizing that we had actually made a very different world, meaning the world started to bend, which wasn't necessarily the intention, as opposed to looking through a conventional plane of glass and seeing on the other side what you anticipate. But in fact, looking through the bent glass and now seeing an interpretation which was quite different from the world you normally see. So you look over here and you see it as it is, as you understand it, and you look through the glass and you see something else. Because what seems to happen here, depending, and if you keep in mind this will be outside and will oxidize and will deal with the rain and the fog and all of this stuff. In fact, it belongs to the weather. It belongs to the weather, but in fact it's conceivable that the weather renders the intention inoperable. Conceivable. Because in the first place, when you look at it, what you see is not what you see. I mean, you see something which is a function of the curve, so it doesn't only suck it up and send it to Zeus, but it sucks it up and it sends it in a form which is a little bit different than a look this way, it becomes something different. So again, I could argue, you probably won't agree, that you're giving another way to see by making a mirror which is obviated with weather, with polish, with all of that. So you're not just giving back the garden as it is and ratifying it, you're telling us something else about the garden.
With all the respect, yes, actually you're right. And this is a different way also to look at this garden. Because you see, now if you sit here, you can see all the people's head and kind of distorted and so on. And this is actually a different way to look at this Japanese garden and so on.
Did you like it?
Oh God, that's what I was asking.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's no scratch.
We need this guy. We need this guy. But what's interesting about this,
They don't see us.
yeah.
Oh, no, I see you.
There you go. But it's at least possible to make an argument that the best design or the best architecture allows you to see the world and understand the world in a very different way than what you might have anticipated. So it adds to the possibilities, and by implication in a human sense, it might suggest that what you know is not all there is to know.
Right.
That there's something else, another way to think and another way to see and another way to understand. And I think, for me, the problem is that maybe this is a political discussion rather than a design content discussion, that nobody wants to say they remodeled Noguchi.
Right.
They only want to say they ratified, confirmed what Noguchi did. But in fact, it seems to me that the strength of the project is understanding Noguchi in a very different way.
Thank you.
Any corrections?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.